Matt Linnell will introduce Mary Katharine, who will help us get inside the mind of the young voter. Matt Linnell.
Thank you, former Senator John Andrews. Wow, there's a lot of people here today. It is so awesome to see this event by CCU and the Centennial Institute have grown so much. Little did I know I was going to be asked to introduce a speaker today, and due to time, I guess I'll keep it short. Recently, I, along with several other students, including Jonathan Voshek here, had the chance to go to Washington, D.C. Well, out there, we were given an awesome opportunity. We were allowed to take a backstage tour of Fox News' Washington, D.C. studios, which was absolutely incredible, an awesome experience. Mary Katharine Ham, she set that up for us and was our contact and gave us a little bit of insight into that and was phenomenal. She's a regular on Fox News, a contributor to the Weekly Standard, and a partner with Guy Benson on Young Guns segment of Hugh Hewitt's nationally syndicated radio show. She's University of Georgia graduate and former managing editor of townhall.com and the originator of the award-winning video blog series Ham Nation. Please give it up for Mary Katharine Ham.
Thank you very much. When they asked me to speak, they did not inform me that I would be going on after the two Michelles and Foster Freeze. So, thanks, guys. I'm really glad to be here today. I actually, before we get started, in honor of another member of the Minnesota delegation that Ms. Bachman mentioned last night, Al Franken, I would like to do a few quick affirmations for you guys, because it's good to know that you're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you. So number one, in 2008, remember when we were thinking, gee, this liberal intellectual college professor with little to no experience might not be the best choice to be president, and we're not sure he can take action when needed? I remember. In May 2010, we have Chris Matthews. I don't see a chain of command here in the Gulf. And if I hear one more time that Secretary Chu has a Nobel Prize, I'm gonna barf. This idiotic cerebral meritocracy has got to step aside to let the people who do things do things. That means taking command, and he hasn't done it. Affirmation number one. Number two, 2009, Obama. You'll be able to keep your health care plan if you like it. 2010, AP. An early draft of an administration regulation estimates that 51% of people will be in federally regulated health insurance plans, not designated by their employer right now, in 3 years. So congrats on being right on that one too. And lastly, in 2009, when we were arguing that the Tea Parties were not violent extremist mobs out to topple the Republic, I reported at the time, and it's just a good factoid to know, so I want you guys to take it and move forward. During the healthcare protests and town halls, there were more than 500 town halls across the United States. There were approximately, well, as far as I could find, documented pieces of evidence of violence at these meetings, 11 incidents, most of which were just touching or stealing a sign. 7 of 11 liberals perpetrated on conservatives. So those are your affirmations. Take those with you. Feel good about them. Now for my topic, which is these kids today. I actually wanted to wear, in the spirit of my topic, a Lady Gaga costume. But I was informed that a sequin unitard with a peacock on my head was not appropriate for the Colorado Christian University crowd. So instead, I wore these sunglasses on my head because it shows how hip I am. Look, when I look at my generation, it's very easy to get depressed. I watch Jersey Shore. I understand. It's painful. But I'm not here to be Debbie Downer. But I'm also not going to deliver all of us from our problems with young people in one speech. Although if I thought I could, I might be able to be president. So my main message about young people is we can't ignore them. The old strategy was to say, okay, well, they're just going to grow up get married, have kids, and turn conservative. Well, they're putting off getting married, having kids, and that means they're putting off turning conservative. So we can't just sort of cede that battlefield and say, oh, it'll correct itself later. As they continue to stay unmarried and without kids and liberal, they become more solid liberal votes from now until the end of time. Now, I'm reminded a little bit, and I say this for this crowd because I know probably a lot of you have been involved in ministry before. When I did youth ministry, I did Young Life for a couple of years. And thank you. And the message in Young Life was always, you have to earn the right to be heard. Now, some reporter in the back is now writing down that Mary Katharine Ham just revealed the master plan to use our sneaky evangelical ways to indoctrinate the children into conservatism. It's just a metaphor, it's an analogy. But it is important to earn the right to be heard on any subject you want to talk to somebody about. And so that's why we can't ignore young people, because if we're not paying attention to them when they're 20 or 25, if we have no message for them, if we're not in their lives, why would they listen to us when they're 30 or 35 when they might actually be convinced? So we need to think about that, and I know you guys think about it with your kids every day, so that's step one in the right direction. There's going to be some good news, I promise, but the bad news first. The recent Pew study on millennials has a couple facts about them, which will probably make you cry. They are skeptical of everything except for government, for which they reserve great measures of goodwill and trust. They love them some Obamacare, even though they have no idea what it is. They favor the public option more than any other generation, but 40% of them have no idea what it is. And they favor Obamacare in general more than any other generation, although 1/3 don't think it'll actually lower costs. Yeah, I'm confused. We're confusing. They're more liberal than other generations. They're more liberal than other generations have been at their age. And they are less religious, and they serve less often in the military than other generations have. And I would be remiss if I didn't say the members of my generation who do serve in the military, while I bash some of my generation, those folks have got it far and above many of us and are coming back from extremely stressful combat situations and just as wonderful people and wonderful leaders who are going to take our generation forward. So. And when you hear those stats about millennials, that sick feeling you get in your stomach is what it feels like to watch Jersey Shore. So you're already getting in touch with young people, so I congratulate you. Now for the good news. You guys with children may dispute it, but the survey says that young people have respect for their elders. So they actually do think that the preceding generations in many ways were morally better and worked harder than they did. So they actually look up to you guys, and that means that those of you who are raising kids in a conservative family might actually get listened to. So that's a plus. They put a premium on having strong marriages and raising children properly. Whether they actually achieve this goal is another issue, but it's good to have goals. They believe in a family obligation to take care of elders in a way that the boomers did not at their age, which is great because when the government that they trust inevitably lets them down and can't pay out those Social Security payments, their parents will have somebody to turn to. More good news, the religious among them are more politically active, both in donations and voting, than the non-religious. Democrats are losing ground in this demographic, although, not much, but it's something. The number of young people, 18 to 29, that lean Republican or lean conservative went from 8 to 15% in 1 year. So, thank you, Barack Obama. More good news, and this is a section of the speech that I like to call, OMG, we actually won something. Because that's exactly how I felt in November of 2009 when McDonald and Christie won their governorships. And then in January when a Republican won a Senate seat in Massachusetts. McDonald, here's a surprise stat for you that you probably never heard in the media, surprise, surprise. McDonnell won young people by 10 points. He also won women by 9 points, just file that away, another thing you probably never heard. This is interesting because the shift is so great. Certainly young voter turnout was way lower than 2008, but in 2008 you'll remember that these voters were going to be Democrats and liberals until the end of all time. You couldn't move them, and in 1 year, McDonnell managed to actually win the young vote in this election. Scott Brown, similarly, he didn't win young people, but he took McCain's margin of 20% and doubled it to 40%. So, now how did they do it? That is the question. McDonnell and Brown both invested unprecedented amounts of money in online advertising. McDonnell with 8% of his advertising budget, Brown with 10% of his. McDonnell outspent his Democratic opponent 5-1 on technology, which when liberals found this out were like, what? Of course we lost. 5-1. And they led in, both campaigns led in every single measure of online presence you can possibly have. Facebook fans, placed ads on Google, Twitter followers, everything you could do. And it actually, in the case of the Brown election, him being ahead in those ways predicted his win before pundits did, if you had looked at the data about 2 weeks before the election. So there's opportunity in technology. Let's talk about a good news point that I left out. Young people are more pro-life than ever before. They're more pro-life than ever before, and this doesn't make a lot of sense to liberals because they're not as religious as older people, and yet they're tied with seniors in the percentage of them who believe abortion should be illegal in almost all cases. This confuses liberals greatly. And generally they argue that it's because of abstinence education or it's because of some imagined sexual repression in our society, which I don't know about you guys, I don't really see it. Please see my Lady Gaga costume referenced earlier. What pro-life advocates say, and I think is what a much more logical explanation, is that young people believe life in the womb is life in the womb, partly because they have pictures of their brothers and sisters' ultrasounds on their refrigerators. When your little brother is your little brother from 12 weeks on, it doesn't occur to you he was never not your brother. And the point being that technology can make things tangible that work for us in a way that we haven't been able to do before. Another example is with transparency. We're at a great moment, and I just hope we're not too late getting there, where advancements in technology can actually take government data and make it useful to us, can actually make a stubborn government more transparent. It means next to nothing to the average person that Obama spent $900 billion on a stimulus that he says worked, right? It's hard to think about $900 billion. But if you're walking around as a 20-year-old with your Android phone and you have, pardon the jargon and whatnot, but you have an app, an augmented reality app that shows you where that money was spent in your community, and you look around and find that $7 million was spent on a dog park, and $7,000 on the sign to advertise that several million was spent on the dog park, that might make an impact on you. Now, we're not quite there yet, but I think there's potential for us moving forward. What about seeing spending online? As a millennial, and I'm just barely in, I just made it, I'm 30. I'm the high edge, I'm the oldest millennial you can have. But I am used to being able to, I don't know, this is just an example off the top of my head. Look for a pair of Steve Madden pumps on eBay and be able to sort it by color, style, and size to my heart's content, although I never do it at work. Why can't I look at government spending the same way? And why doesn't that expectation catch up with government at some point for young people? That is where I think we have an opportunity. It is in the gulf between, the difference between, well, let me take, for instance, my BlackBerry. An interesting stat about millennials is that 83% of them confess to sleeping with their phone. There's actually a photo of me online, available publicly. I think it's on my own Flickr account that a friend of mine took, of me actually spooning my BlackBerry on a couch. I fell asleep, I needed to text message somebody. But it just, that's how important technology is to young people. And what I think is interesting is, this $150 BlackBerry I have, I can change the background 3 times a day. I can take pictures of whatever I want to. I think the background right now might be the foster kittens that I just acquired. Are adorable. And I can sync it with my Mac. I can sync it with my iTunes and my perfectly customized playlists. Everything in my life works that way when it comes to technology. Everything is mine. Everything is exactly how I want it to be. I can go right now and pick up an app that tells me where my seafood came from that's at the local market. Or I can pick up one that makes it look like I'm drinking beer when I tip my phone back. The point being that young people live in this highly customized environment. Everything is made for them. They can tailor everything with this $150 gadget. When are they going to expect the same service, the same efficiency, the same flexibility from the giant state apparatus that forcibly takes 1/3 of their income? So I put to you guys that it is in the gulf between iTunes and the Social Security Administration that conservatives are made. But we, as conservatives, have to be prepared to talk to young people on their level using those tools once they get to that gulf and realize this. So that's our job. I want to point out a couple people who are doing it right here in Colorado. Kelly Marr, are you in the room? Woo-woo! Kelly Marr, a 20-something who runs whosaidyoussaid.com, and she has 8 videographers throughout the state, taping liberals and Democrats and public figures doing exactly what they frequently do, which is say crazy stuff. This is a really beneficial business to be in for conservatives. Hey there. I guess that's my warning. Lights will come down. I would also like to point out Amanda with www.libertyontherocks.org. She very smartly combines young people who might be interested in conservatism with one of their favorite things, which is alcohol. It's true. And I also do want to say the Independence Institute for having the ATF event, which sounds awesome and has a really cool t-shirt. What's not to love? I have one last thought. I don't know if any of you have seen Toy Story 3. It's great. So it turns out that Barbie's libertarian, and her last quote to the big bully in the movie is, "Authority should derive from the consent of the governed, not from the threat of force." So failing all else, please go home and teach your children to have Barbie tell those big government Cabbage Patch Kids and that little socialist Tickle Me Elmo exactly what liberty is all about.
Okay, watch for it any day now. It's going to be the Mary Katharine Ham app for your smartphone. When you don't have the answer, she will. And she's got answers for some of our questions right now. Who's first? Who's second?
Repeat the question. She asked, how do I really get along with Juan Williams? Actually, Juan Williams is one of the nicest people at Fox, and Michelle can confirm that for you if she's here. He's just an incredibly nice person, an incredibly honest person. It's so great to be on TV with somebody who you know is not lying on purpose. You're like, because people just go on and they just say lies, and you're like, what? Juan never does that. He's great to be friends with, and actually, interesting story, last week my fiance and I went out with him and his wife to this really cool Georgetown club at like 10:30 on a Friday night and had a great time. So he's also a really cool guy to party with.
Mary Katharine, I was wondering, I've got a 25-year-old, and I'm wondering what you think of taking the conversation to a, if you will, financial level on like the death tax
Right.
sort of thing. Is that a good thing to do? They seem to be very receptive, or at least they don't go away from that when you start a conversation, getting right to that.
If I'm getting the question correct, I think that in general, especially if your kids are in public school, and I went to public school, so I'm not hating too much, but that they don't get a financial education. They miss this whole piece of what makes life work, which is the free market in this country. And so teaching your children about that in ways subtle and not so subtle are always going to be helpful, because you have to ignore those forces in order to be a liberal. So anything you can teach your kids about that is great. I think when your kids get their first job, or if you choose when you're giving them allowance, it's always helpful to go ahead and take those taxes out and explain to them how it works. I think there is a moment that conservatives are missing out on when 20-somethings get that first paycheck and they go, how much of my money is going here? So just explaining that to them, and also explaining that I think it's important for conservatives to always explain that giving up your money because the government made you do it, is not compassion. And explaining that in our house, we give money, we give time, we give love, we volunteer, because that is compassion. That's an important message for all kids to have.
Thank you. I have a daughter about your age, and I admire you, I admire her. The problem is with my beautiful daughter, she's busy with her life, raising her children, and great life, but she cannot get beyond, I think it's the politically correct that she's been raised on, that she will not, we cannot have a discussion, without her saying I'm an extremist, and I'm trying to tell her, what's going on, and I said, well, I pay attention more, I guess. I listen to talk radio and I read, online, but I just don't know if I'll ever break that barrier with her, being so into the politically correct side of media and all that. Any suggestions?
I think it's hard. I mean, that's the bottom line. But I think that, and I'm going to make another ministry analogy, reporters don't freak out, that in your life as her mom, as a nice person who raised her well, you are a testament to the fact, to what conservatives are, just like when Christians go into ministry and they live their lives in a certain way. So that's your first victory. You're her mom, you can't be evil. So starting with that. Second of all, I think With young people, and I think also with women voters, it's good. Many of them are unaffiliated. They really like this idea of being independent. And so with many young people and women, I put to them, you know, how really independent are you if you're voting Democrat every single time against, you know, any opponent at all times? Challenging them to sort of embrace that independent spirit and think a little bit more outside the box is a good way to go, I think. Not in a judgmental way, but just to say, you know, that's something they really pride about themselves, is that they're independent. But are they really? That's the question to ask. And third, I think young people are very, and surveys show this, are very keen on, they don't dislike government, but they want government to work well. Now, to the extent that you can explain that because this government is doing 3 billion things, when it maybe should only be doing, oh, I don't know, even if it just did 1 million, it might be better at those million, and it might serve people better because it's only doing 1 million things. I think that's a good argument, because they're not anti-government, they're pro-government, but they want government to work for the people it's supposed to work for. So it's our job to explain where it falls short.
Mary Katharine, just like to ask you, one of the hallmarks of youth, I think, is the natural rebelliousness, the wanting to kind of buck up against authority. Some of us never grow out of that. Right now, for the last decade, the face of authority, the face of the government has been the Republicans. Right now, the face of authority, the face of a very oppressive authority, is the Democrats, President Obama, all the way down, including most of our states. So if you might talk about kind of talking to, you know, that natural rebelliousness of youth, and kind of bringing home that, hey, you want to be independent, you want to speak up for yourself, you want to stand up for individual rights and responsibilities, it's bucking up against this authoritarianism that is coming from the top down.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly works in our favor to some extent. I think we're handicapped a little bit by the fact, I don't want to make you guys sad, but the right is kind of never going to get the social cachet that the left has. We're never going to be those cool kids, although these sunglasses are very cool. We are never going to get credit for that. So I think it's important to embrace this sort of, it's hip to be square kind of idea if you're a young conservative person. I grew up, speaking of the rebellion, I grew up in a very, very liberal city. I went to public schools my entire life. I watched social programs and I watched them not work. I watched them hurt the people I cared about in some cases. And that is how I became conservative. So I guess I was rebelling to some extent. So I think that that's a message we can carry. I think it's important to talk about freedom. I mean, to me, it's insane that freedom is somehow uncool. Like, we are not these giant scolds. We would like people to have choices. We would like people to be able to own guns to protect themselves. We would like, you know, oh, horror of horrors, unfettered free speech in campaigns, while our friends on the left support a government attorney who actually argued that the government should be able to ban books because of McCain-Feingold. Our position is way cooler. So talking in those ways, I think, is good. Just about the freedom, the liberty itself, the choices that you have in your life is a better way to frame messages, I think, for young people than to talk just politics all the time, because they get very turned off by what they believe is this sort of talking head back and forth stuff.
And just for the record, I voted for the Lady Gaga look. It was President Armstrong who vetoed it. Mary Katharine Ham, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you soon on Fox and in the Weekly Standard. Bravo. We're going...